The markets are closed, but the business stories are just heating up. Hello, I'm Gerg Cahiles. Catch up with us on Business Brief. Asian stock markets rose on Friday as signs of easing of China-U.S. trade tension emerged. This came after lackluster earnings from tech bellwethers Apple and Amazon fueled worries about the impact of tariffs. China's Commerce Ministry said that the U.S. has repeatedly expressed its willingness to negotiate on tariffs, and Beijing's door is open for talks. Japan's Nikkei 225 rose by 0.9%, while Australia's ASX 200 climbed more than 1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index led the pack with almost 1.5% jump. South Korea's Kospi inched up by just a fraction. Indonesia's Jakarta Composite Index ended 0.3%, and India's Nifty 50 advanced nearly 0.2%. In the currency markets, the U.S. dollar weakening against several major Asian currencies. The dollar slipped nearly 0.2% against the Japanese yen and flat with downward bias versus the Hong Kong dollar. The Australian dollar strengthened, gaining 0.5%. Meanwhile, the U.S. dollar dropped 0.7% against the Singapore dollar and saw a sharper 2% decline versus the South Korean won. Against the Thai baht, the dollar also fell by more than 1%. Gold prices, meanwhile, climbed more tn 1%. Oil markets were mixed, with West Texas Intermediate crude rising almost 0.7%, and Brent crude inching up 0.6%, while Dubai crude plunged nearly 10%. In the crypto space, Bitcoin inched up 0.2%, while Ethereum dipped 0.5%. Beijing evaluates a U.S. offer to start trade talks. Seen as a shift in tone, China responds to Washington's multiple messages pushing for dialogue. Beijing demands a show of sincerity by removing Trump's tariffs. Trump's duties on Chinese goods now stand at 145%. Beijing retaliated with 125% tariffs on U.S. goods. Global markets are watching as the two giants edge towards negotiation. Japan's top economic negotiator gave updates on tariff negotiations with the U.S. They discussed how Japan can expand trade, non-tariff measures, and economic security cooperation. Ryosei Akazawa spoke to reporters in Washington, D.C. after a meeting with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The Japanese side again asked for the U.S. to reconsider its decision to impose sweeping global duties, most of which were paused by President Donald Trump for 90 days. The Japanese official said American tariffs are costing at least one Japanese automaker $1 million every hour. Japan plans to hold a third round of discussions after the middle of this month.
Japanese automakers are in a situation where one such company is losing $1 million every hour. It is difficult to say more on this, but we will work carefully and diligently to protect our national interests. We are making every effort to achieve a win-win outcome as soon as possible and are making it a top priority to reach a conclusion that is beneficial both for Japan and the United States.
Department of Government Efficiency head and billionaire Tesla CEO Elon Musk says his agency's work will be a long-term effort to cut wasteful spending. In an interview with Fox News, Musk downplayed the significance of their cuts in U.S. government agencies, likening some of the programs to saving baby pandas. Musk previously bared his plans to step back from the agency so he can focus on his e-vehicle company, Tesla.
Do you guys feel like you're putting yourself at risk by doing this because you're stirring up so much hostility by these people ripping us off?
100%. Well, we don't need to speculate about that. You can see online in the protests that they make that very clear. I mean, I've been hanged in effigy many times. There have been people that have actively advocated at these violent protests for my death, and have also advocated for the death of the people at Doge.
U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs could add $900 million to Apple's operating costs in its fiscal third quarter, raising questions about supply chains, pricing, and production strategy. Apple CEO Tim Cook made the disclosure during the company's second quarter earnings call, warning that trade tensions are creating significant cost pressures. Most of Apple's iPhone supply chain is still based in China, the primary target of Trump's tariff policy. While Apple has shifted some assembly to India, the U.S. administration continues to press for iPhone production to return to American soil. Apple recently announced a $500 billion investment, which the White House considered as a victory for domestic manufacturing, but much of the funding is focused on server infrastructure for Apple Intelligence and training facilities for U.S. tech workers. For global consumers and investors, the cost burden may eventually be passed on, potentially impacting pricing on iPhones, services, and future devices. For the tech suppliers worldwide, including in Southeast Asia, the shift in Apple's manufacturing strategy could signal new opportunities or a further consolidation of power in U.S.-aligned markets. Workers in major economies marked Labor Day with mass demonstrations, demanding shorter work hours, stronger pensions, and fairer labor policies amid a global push for more equitable employment standards. In Chile, violent clashes break out in the capital Santiago as police used water cannons to disperse protesters who hurled objects and Molotov cocktails at armored vehicles. In Brazil and Mexico, thousands rallied to demand a reduction in work hours without losing pay. Brazilian workers in Sao Paulo protest the six-day work week, while in Mexico, demonstrators call for a shift to a 40-hour week down from 48. They're also pushing for better pensions and retirement security. The global labor push echoes across the Philippines, where lawmakers and business groups remain divided on a proposed 200 peso national wage hike. As inflation, productivity, and cost of living pressures intensify, global companies operating in the Philippines and across Asia face growing calls to balance competitiveness with fair labor practices, redefining the future of work across supply chains and emerging markets. We have to pause for a few reminders. The biggest business stories from around the country are up next. You're watching Business Brief. The Department of Agriculture defers the full implementation of its 20 pesos per kilo rice program, heeding the COMELEC's advice. The poll body warned of possible politicking during the election ban. Agriculture Secretary Francisco Chu Laurel led the launch of the project in Cebu on Labor Day. The Visayas pilot covers 4 million people until year-end. Malacanang plans to expand the program nationwide through 2028. Despite criticisms, House Speaker Martin Romualdez says the plan is sustainable with rising palay output, with solar-powered irrigation boosting harvest in Quezon. A major local auto player unveils a new range of eco-friendly vehicles for small businesses. We have Sujin Kim on the line with more details. Go ahead, Sujin.
Yes, Gerg, in a landmark launch at the Hyundai Truck and Bus Mobility Expo this afternoon, Harry Philippines Asia unveiled their electric truck, electric minibus, and the locally assembled deliver low-emission, high-efficiency, and business-ready mobility options for MSMEs. With Harry's first fully duty truck, this delivers a range of up to 260 kilometers full recharge in just 71 minutes. Built for city delivery fleets seeking to slash fuel and maintenance costs with up to 9% lower operating expenses over 5 years. The Country Electric, meanwhile, raises the bar for public and private transport. The all-electric minibus is tailored for schools, LGUs, tourism operators, and corporate shuttles, delivering up to 21% savings versus conventional models. Ramping up localization, Harry also rolled out the Harry, a Filipino-assembled utility vehicle designed to serve the grassroots economy, with a starting price of 1.76 million pesos. With stronger policy backing, growing demand from MSMEs, and locally tailored solutions, Harry is positioning itself as a major player in the Philippines' sustainable transport revolution. And those are the latest updates from Muntinlupa City. Back to you, Gerg.
Thank you for that report, Sujin Kim. Philippine Ambassador to the United States, Jose Manuel Romualdez, hosts a business forum in Washington, D.C., attended by Trade Secretary Cristina Roque and Presidential Economic Advisor Frederick Go. Also present were representatives from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. ASEAN Business Council, and the Semiconductor Industry Association of America. The ambassadors shared photos from the event on social media, saying they continue to spread the message that the Philippines is open for business. No further details have been released. Roque and Go are currently in the U.S. to negotiate the 17% tariff imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on Philippine exports. The Department of Agriculture assures that Filipino industries will not be put at a disadvantage as the Philippines negotiates lower tariffs with the United States. Agriculture Secretary Francisco Chu Laurel Jr. says any deal on tariff reductions will not automatically lead to a surge in imports, but may simply shift purchases to the U.S. instead of traditional suppliers like Brazil. The statement comes as the Philippines seek relief from the recent 17% tariff imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump on Philippine exports. The White House has temporarily lowered the rate to 10% for 90 days, but the window for negotiation remains tight. For exporters and import-reliant sectors, the outcome of these talks could impact trade flows, supply chains, and pricing strategy. Business leaders are watching closely as the Philippines navigates tariff diplomacy amid a more protectionist U.S. trade posture and a shifting global economic order. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. reaffirms his support for the current wage-setting system as pressure builds for a 200 peso across-the-board wage hike pushed by labor groups. The president points out that since July last year, 16 regions have already raised their minimum wages through the regional wage board system. He stressed that any wage increase must be carefully studied to avoid unintended impacts on businesses and the broader economy. In Metro Manila, the wage board is expected to start public consultations soon for a possible new wage order following its last adjustment in July 2024. Data from the National Wages and Productivity Commission shows that Metro Manila has the highest daily minimum wage for non-agricultural workers at 645 pesos, while Region 9 has the lowest at 414 pesos. The president's position signals a preference for a decentralized approach where regional boards decide wages based on local economic conditions. But with inflation still a concern and only a few session days left in Congress, labor groups are calling for stronger national action. The big question now, can lawmakers deliver relief to workers without triggering layoffs or forcing small businesses to close? Gabriela blasts President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. for ignoring workers' demand for higher pay. The group calls his inaction cruel as prices of goods and services soar. Gabriela points out that women in low-paying contractual jobs are most affected. Marcos has deferred to regional wage boards to decide on the issue, but Gabriela said the RWB's approved wage hike average, which is at 61 pesos across the country, is not enough for households to cope with the 1,200 peso livable wage. Gabriela Women's Party List House Bill 7568, seeking a 750 peso across-the-board wage increase, is pending discussion at the committee level. The Department of Finance reviews a possible end to the tax-free policy on small online purchases after local retailers warn of unfair competition from foreign e-commerce players. Finance Secretary Ralph Recto says they are re-evaluating the de minimis rule, which allows imported items valued at 10,000 pesos or less to enter duty and tax-free. The threshold has been in place since 2016 under the Customs Modernization and Tariff Act. Recto says he understands the concerns of local retailers who argue that foreign sellers avoid tax while domestic brands shoulder full compliance. They also warn that the government is losing billions in potential revenue. The Philippine Retailers Association is calling for the rule to be scrapped, saying it creates a distorted market and gives foreign platforms a free pass at the expense of homegrown enterprises. The review comes amid growing demand for a level playing field in digital trade, with policymakers balancing consumer access, tax fairness, and support for local MSMEs. For business community, any change to the de minimis rule could signal a broader shift towards tighter digital regulation and a push to demand local industry in the cross-border e-commerce era. The Bureau of Internal Revenue has issued new rules exempting retirement benefits from income and withholding taxes, provided that benefits come from BIR-qualified private retirement plans. Revenue Regulation Number 15-2025, signed by Finance Secretary Ralph Recto and BIR Commissioner Romeo Lumagi Jr., took effect on April 29. Under the new guidelines, retirement payouts, including pensions, gratuities, and profit sharing, are tax exempt if the employee is at least 50 years old, has served the same employer for at least 10 years, and has not previously availed of a tax-exempt retirement. Employers must obtain a certificate of qualification from the BIR within 30 days to access these benefits. Investment income earned by retirement funds is also tax-exempt, except for gains from stocks traded on the local exchange, which remain taxable. Employer contributions to retirement funds are deductible from gross income, with excess contributions amortized over 10 years. The Philippine business leaders, these changes offer a strategic opportunity to enhance retirement benefits, optimize tax planning, and strengthen employee retention, particularly amid an aging workforce and growing demand for financial security. Local hotel bookings by Filipinos skyrocket in 2024, with more travelers prioritizing short stays for wellness and relaxation. That's according to a new survey by travel app Klook. Klook Philippines General Manager Michelle Ho says young Filipinos, particularly millennials and Gen Z, are taking time off to mentally reset and unplug. The survey shows most prefer 2-night stays at hotels or resorts that include free breakfast and have a pool. It also finds that 45% of respondents book their accommodations 1 to 3 months in advance. Klook's Travel Pulse survey polled 5,000 respondents across Asia Pacific, including 500 Filipinos. The majority of users are between 25 and 40 years old. The surge in domestic bookings reflect a strong rebound in local tourism, now fueled by leisure travelers and young professionals driving spending across hospitality, food, and transportation sectors. The Department of Transportation is looking into a supposed damaged passport scheme that's now circulating online, involving passengers allegedly barred from flying due to minor wear and tear on their travel documents. The incident has sparked public outrage and renewed calls for clearer guidelines on passport validity. Our mobility correspondent, G. Baroga, has the details.
After an incident about a supposedly torn passport derailing a trip to Bali, Indonesia went viral, Transport Secretary Vince Dizon was quick to set the record straight. There's no proof yet that the Punit passport scam is going on in our airports.
magkakabit na box. Kailangan, i-explain natin sa ito. At kaya bigay tayo ng very strong warning. Airlines at sa lahat ng agencies tulad ng BI na humahawak ng passport ng mga kababayan.
In her now viral social media post, Diana Natividad shared that when they arrived at the airport, they went straight to pay their travel tax and everything went smooth. But when they got to the check-in counter, a ground staff member pointed out a small tear in her father's passport. After waiting a while, Diana's aunt went to the senior citizen counter and his father was given a boarding pass right away. But when it was time to board, he was stopped anew. Secretary Dizon clarifies,
Double check namin sa Bali Airport at kinonfirm nila na nung pinadala ng Cebu Pacific yung screenshot ng state ng yung sitwasyon ng passport na yun. Ang Bali mismo ang nagsabi, huwag na po ipasakayin masaya dahil pag-ibigay namin siya.
In an interview on Bilyonaryo News Channel's Agenda, Secretary Dizon reminded travelers to always be extra cautious when it comes to their documents.
Ang meron nga pong authority na humawak sa mga passport ay ang mga airline representatives dahil yun po ay kanilang obligasyon ayon sa ating mga international air treaties at air regulations at syempre ang immigration officials natin.
To help address passport concerns, the DOTR is teaming up with the Department of Foreign Affairs to roll out help desks at major international airports, NAIA, Cebu, Clark, and Davao.
Kung medyo nagdududa ang mga kababayan natin sa estado ng kanilang passport, meron silang pupuntahan para magtanong at ipakita at ipacheck kung makakalusot ba itong mga nakikita nilang problema sa passport nila sa kanilang patutunguhang bansa.
Secretary Dizon earlier said they're hoping to have this ready in the next 2 weeks. For BNC Mobility, G. Baroga.
Ayala-led ASEAN Corporation is looking for technical partners to help develop its offshore wind projects in the Philippines. ASEAN President and CEO Eric Francia says the company doesn't have the in-house expertise needed for offshore wind and will need partners to move these projects forward. Francia adds they are also exploring partnerships as a route to market. Data from the Department of Energy shows ASEAN is planning offshore wind projects in Bataan, Cavite, and Batangas with a target capacity of 1,248 megawatts under its subsidiary Giga Wind 5 Incorporated. Philippine shares rebounded in the 6,400 level in the final trading day of the week. The PSE index ended higher by almost 0.9% to close at 6411, finishing the day as the 8th best performer in Asia. Sectoral indices ended mixed, with services rising the most at almost 3%. Decliners outpaced advancers 97 to 104. Total value turnover reached 6.9 billion pesos. Majority of the day's most active stocks ended in the green, with international container terminal services rising the most at more than 5%. Meanwhile, at the foreign exchange market, the peso is currently trading at 55.81 against the greenback, strengthening from previous close of 55.84. And that's a wrap for today's Business Brief. I'm Gerg Cahiles. Join us again tomorrow or on Monday as we bring you the stories that help you plan your next big bold moves in business. Only here on the Bilyonaryo News Channel. See you then.